The air on my 27th birthday carried the scent of wealth, crystal stemware, designer fragrances, and the kind of laughter that never quite reached anyone's eyes filled the private dining room. My grandfather, William Crawford, raised his champagne flute and fixed his gaze on me with that particular smile of his. "So, Charlotte," he said in that calm, measured tone, "tell me something. How exactly have you been managing that $3.4 million trust fund of yours?" The entire world seemed to tilt sideways in that moment. I found myself blinking rapidly, trying to process what I'd just heard. What trust fund? The question came out barely louder than a whisper. Every sound in the room ceased instantly. Forks stopped moving, glasses froze halfway to lips, and the air itself seemed to go still. My mother. Catherine's hand halted mid-gesture, suspended in like a statue. My father David's throat worked visibly as though he'd just tried to swallow something sharp and dangerous. Then, my grandfather simply turned his attention back to the table, his expression unchanged, unnervingly calm. Where did the money go? His question cut through the silence like a knife through silk. In that frozen moment, beneath the glittering chandeliers and behind all those carefully constructed smiles, the truth became crystal clear. This dinner had never been about celebration. This was something else entirely. This was a reckoning. My name is Charlotte Bennett, and until that precise moment, I genuinely believed I understood who my family was. Growing up, I'd learned that success in our world meant keeping quiet. You smiled at the dinner table, you didn't ask uncomfortable questions, and you absolutely never, ever discussed money. These were the unspoken rules I'd been raised to follow. Now I lived in San Francisco, deliberately distant from their marble foyers and imported automobiles, making my living as a freelance graphic designer from a cramped apartment in the Mission District. The paint peeled from the walls, the plumbing made strange noises at odd hours, but it belonged to me, and that mattered more than anything. My nights were spent hunched over my laptop, creating brand identities while the city pulsed outside my windows, cold coffee sitting next to stacks of overdue bills that seemed to multiply when I wasn't looking. My parents, David and Catherine, maintained their residence just 20 minutes away in Marin County. 4 spacious bedrooms, an infinity pool, matching Tesla vehicles in the garage. We maintained contact, but our conversations never ventured into anything meaningful. Phone calls would begin with the perfunctory, "How's work going?" and somehow end before I could formulate a real answer. The last time they'd genuinely surprised me was at my college graduation ceremony. I'd walked across that stage carrying $70,000 in student loan debt and a diploma I'd earned entirely on my own merit and effort. They'd embraced me, presented me with an elaborately wrapped package, and told me how incredibly proud they were. Inside that beautiful wrapping was a hardcover book titled Financial Literacy for Young Adults. I'd managed to keep smiling for all the photographs. That evening, alone in my apartment, I'd found myself crying over the bathroom sink, finally understanding that they'd never intended to help me at all. Despite everything, I kept my head down and pushed forward. I paid my rent on time, skipped meals when necessary, and accepted every freelance project that came my way, no matter how small. When my friends posted photographs from their vacations, I'd laugh along and say, one day, I'll be able to do that too. One day, I'd earn enough to actually breathe without constantly calculating every expense. Then, exactly 1 week before my 27th birthday arrived, my supervisor called me into his glass-walled office. His expression communicated everything before he even opened his mouth. "Charlotte, I'm so sorry," he said, "but we're implementing company-wide downsizing." I gathered my belongings into a cardboard box, took the bus back to my apartment, and collapsed on the couch next to Harper, my roommate, my anchor, the one constant presence in my life for the past 2 years. "Your parents will help you out, right?" she asked, her voice full of hope I didn't share. I laughed, and the sound came out bitter and hollow. "They'll probably recommend some budgeting application," I told her. That night, despite knowing better, I called them anyway. "Mom, I lost my position today," I said quietly. "Oh, that's unfortunate, sweetheart," she replied. and I could hear her keyboard clicking steadily in the background. "But you'll figure something out. You always manage somehow." "I'm behind on rent, Mom," I said, hearing the desperation creeping into my voice. "I don't know how I'm going to make it this month." "Well," she said briskly, "perhaps this will teach you the importance of better saving habits. Anyway, we're making reservations for your birthday dinner. Le Bernardin, 7:30. Don't be late." "Mom," I protested, "that restaurant charges $300 per person." She laughed that particular laugh of hers. "Don't be cheap about it, Charlotte. It's your birthday, after all. Wear something nice." The line went dead before I could say anything else. I sat staring at my reflection in the darkened television screen. Exhausted eyes, split ends, lipstick that had faded hours ago. $300 a plate, I whispered to my reflection. That's half of my entire monthly grocery budget. Harper looked up from where she was sitting on the couch. "You don't have to go, you know," she said gently. "Yeah, I do," I replied. In my family, declining a dinner invitation is considered worse than sacrilege. So I marked the date on my calendar the way someone might mark the day of their own execution. The week crawled toward my birthday like water draining slowly from a bathtub. I attempted to stay productive, sending out resumes, updating my portfolio, reaching out to contacts, but rejection emails accumulated faster than I could possibly read them. My savings account balance dropped below 4 figures for the first time in years. Every sound from the hallway made me jump, half expecting the landlord to appear demanding overdue rent. By Friday, sleep had become impossible. Harper found me at 2 in the morning, still hunched over my laptop, eyes burning. "Eve, you need to get some rest," she said softly. "I can't," I told her. "If I stop working, I'll have to think about everything." "About what?" she asked. "About that dinner. About them acting like everything is perfectly fine while my entire life is falling apart." She squeezed my shoulder firmly. "Then make this the last time they get to treat you like this." I didn't understand what she meant yet, but those words stayed with me, echoing in my mind. Saturday arrived bright and merciless. I stood in front of my closet examining the same 3 inadequate options. Jeans that were too faded, a blazer missing a button, and a black dress I'd purchased 3 years earlier for a job interview that hadn't gone well. I chose the dress. It still fit, mostly, though it was tighter than I remembered. During the bus ride to the restaurant, I watched people through the window. Tourists laughing freely, couples holding hands without a care, a child licking ice cream that dripped steadily down his arm. I envied how uncomplicated their moments seemed. Le Bernardin shimmered with glass and gold and the kind of wealth I'd never quite belonged to. My parents had already been seated when I arrived, occupying a prime table near the windows. My mother wore a red silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My father sat in his impeccably tailored navy suit that I knew was custom-made. The table gleamed with wine glasses and silverware whose proper names I'd never learned. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Mom said, air-kissing me while her perfume made my eyes water. Dad looked at me carefully. "You look tired," he observed. "It's been a rough week," I said quietly. "I lost my job." He nodded as though I'd just mentioned the weather forecast. "Well, that happens sometimes," he said dismissively. "You'll bounce back eventually." They immediately launched into elaborate stories about their recent European vacation, the new Tesla's autopilot feature, a renovation project they were planning for the guest bathroom. My words seemed to dissolve into the ambient noise. I kept glancing at the door, mentally counting down the minutes until I could leave. I was supposed to feel celebrated, cherished even, but instead I felt like a prop in their perfectly curated picture. Then the door opened, and a noticeable ripple of surprise swept through the entire restaurant as my grandfather made his entrance. William Crawford, with his silver hair perfectly styled, tall and commanding, every step deliberate and measured. The maitre d' practically stumbled over himself trying to escort him properly. My mother's carefully maintained smile faltered immediately. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice climbing an octave higher than usual. "Celebrating my granddaughter, naturally," he replied. His eyes found mine across the room. "Happy birthday, Charlotte?" He embraced me, and it was real, Solid, warm, and I felt like I could finally breathe properly for the first time all evening. "I didn't know you were coming," I said, still shocked. "Wouldn't miss it for anything in the world," he told me. He settled into the seat beside me, ordered whiskey neat from the attentive server, and began making polite conversation with my parents. But there was an edge in his voice I couldn't quite identify, as though he already knew something the rest of us didn't. Then he smiled at me, raised his glass slowly, and spoke the words that would change absolutely everything. The whiskey caught the light from the chandelier as my grandfather lifted his glass with deliberate ceremony. "So, Charlotte," he said, his tone deceptively casual, "tell me how you've been spending your $3.4 million trust fund." The air itself seemed to shatter. I heard my own heartbeat before I registered the silence that had fallen over our table. I blinked once, twice, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. "What trust fund?" I finally managed to say. Every fork at nearby tables stopped moving. My mother's smile fractured like fine porcelain dropped on marble. My father's throat worked visibly as though he'd swallowed broken glass. My grandfather's expression remained completely unchanged. He simply leaned back in his chair, perfectly calm. "The trust fund I established when you were born," he explained. "Your parents were supposed to transfer the full amount to you when you turned 25 years old." My mother laughed, but it came out too quickly, too high-pitched. "Oh, Dad, you must be confused about something." "There was no confusion, Catherine," he said quietly but firmly. "Don't do this." It was the first time in my entire life I'd seen her go completely still, frozen by something other than social calculation. He turned to the hovering waiter. "We'll need a private room immediately, please." Within minutes, we were being ushered away from the main dining area, plates half-eaten, champagne forgotten, and going flat. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded somehow final, irreversible. Inside the private room, the air felt noticeably colder, or perhaps that was just my imagination. My grandfather's assistant, Allison, was already there waiting, tablet open and ready. A man in an expensive tailored suit stood beside her, his expression professionally neutral. "Jonathan Pierce," my grandfather announced, gesturing to him. "My attorney. This won't take very long," Grandpa said, looking directly at my parents. "I simply want clarity on a few matters." Jonathan opened a leather folder and slid a substantial stack of papers across the polished table. "Miss Bennett," he said, addressing me directly, "this is the trust account that was created under your name 27 years ago. Initial deposit was $1 million. Current value, given normal market growth and interest accumulation, should be approximately $3.4 million. My fingers hovered above the papers, afraid to touch them. "Should be," I repeated carefully. He nodded, his expression grim. "As of this morning, the actual balance in the account is $200,000. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. 200,000. 27 years of savings, investments, compound interest, all of it essentially gone. My grandfather's gaze never left my parents' faces. "Explain this to me," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Dad wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. We used some of it, just to cover the mortgage when the market crashed back in 2008. "Some of it?" Grandpa's voice remained perfectly level. "That's over $3 million, David." Mom's hands were shaking as they clutched her designer purse. "We were managing it for her future," she insisted. "We didn't want her to waste it on frivolous things." I laughed, and it came out short, sharp, and ugly. "You mean like wasting it on rent payments or student loans or food?" Mom turned to face me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "You don't understand the pressure we were under," she said, voice breaking. "The pressure?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "I've been eating ramen for dinner for the past 5 years while you were driving matching Teslas." Dad leaned forward, desperation bleeding through his carefully maintained facade. "We made some mistakes, we know that, but we were going to tell you eventually." "When?" I demanded. "After you'd spent every last dollar? After I'd lost my apartment?" Mom's voice went small and childlike. "We love you, Charlotte. We were protecting you from yourself." "Protecting me?" My voice was shaking now, too. You stole from me. You stole my entire future and called it love." Grandpa raised his hand slightly, and the room fell silent immediately. "Michael," he said, "show her everything." The attorney opened another folder revealing bank statements, property deeds, receipts, all marked with dates spanning the past 2 decades. "They bought a second property in Malibu," he explained, his voice professionally neutral. "2 luxury vehicles, extensive jewelry purchases, multiple cruises, country club memberships, all funded directly from your trust account." Each word felt like another blow. I stared at the documents spread across the table, seeing my entire stolen life laid out in transaction records. "How much can we recover?" Grandpa asked quietly. "Approximately $2 million through asset seizures and forced sales," Jonathan replied. "The Malibu property, both vehicles, various other assets. We can file criminal charges as well. Felony financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. We're looking at up to 10 years in prison." Mom gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Charlotte, please," she begged. "You wouldn't actually send us to prison. We're your parents." "Parents are supposed to protect their children," I said quietly, finding my voice again. "They don't steal from them." Grandpa turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "It's your decision, sweetheart. This is your money, your future they took. You get to decide what happens next." The room seemed to blur around me. I thought about 27 years of dinners where I'd smiled through uncomfortable silences, of student loans I'd paid with ramen noodles and overtime hours, of birthdays where they'd sent flowers but never their actual presence or support. I met my mother's eyes directly. "You left me with absolutely nothing," I said, my voice steady now. "Now you have exactly that in return." The words landed like thunder in the small room. Mom's shoulders collapsed inward, her composure finally breaking completely. Dad looked away, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles working. Grandpa nodded once to Jonathan. "File all the necessary motions," he instructed. Mom reached across the table, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Dad, please," she begged my grandfather. "She's your granddaughter." "And you are my daughter," he said evenly. "But there's a fundamental difference between blood relation and actual character." She began to sob then, really sob, and it wasn't for me or what she'd done to me. It was for everything they were about to lose, for the comfortable life that was being stripped away. As the lawyers began finalizing the papers, I stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly below, construction cranes, cars moving like insects, the slow pulse of millions of people living their lives, most of them never knowing about this particular drama unfolding above them. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, letting it ground me in reality. For the first time in more years than I could count, I didn't feel small or powerless or invisible. Behind me, I heard Grandpa speaking in that authoritative tone. "Deeds, titles, account access, everything transfers back to Charlotte Bennett, effective immediately." When I turned around, Allison handed me a slim manila envelope. "These are your property documents," she said quietly. "The Pacific Heights apartment is fully under your name now." I nodded, accepting them with hands that only trembled slightly. "Thank you," I managed to say. Mom whispered something then, her voice barely audible beneath her crying. "You'll regret this someday," she said. I looked at her, really looked at her properly for maybe the first time ever. The woman who'd taught me to keep my voice soft, my needs smaller, my worth tied entirely to other people's approval. "No," I said clearly. "For once in my life, I really won't regret this." They left shortly. After that, escorted out by building security like common criminals. The door closed behind them with a decisive click. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or oppressive anymore. It felt clean, purifying almost. Grandpa stood slowly, his movements careful, and walked over to where I stood by the window. "You did the right thing," he told me. "I don't feel good about it," I admitted honestly. "Justice rarely feels good in the moment," he said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "But it's absolutely necessary. You're not alone anymore, Charlotte. You never really were." That night, I went to see the apartment, the one I'd never been allowed to even know existed. Pacific Heights was quiet at this hour, all glass and steel and stunning bay views. The doorman recognized my name immediately. "Mr. Crawford said you'd be arriving," he told me, smiling warmly. When I unlocked the door, the smell of expensive candles hit me first, some designer scent I couldn't identify. Everything was impeccably staged. Neutral tones, marble countertops, a coffee table with art books about modern design, a stranger's life furnished entirely with my stolen money. I wandered through the rooms slowly, my fingertips brushing against walls, furniture, all the physical evidence of their betrayal. On the kitchen counter, I found a lease folder, tenant names, rent deposit receipts. My parents had been collecting rental income for years, thousands of dollars that should have been mine. I sank onto the pristine couch and laughed, the sound raw and borderline hysterical. Then the laughter somehow broke into tears, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. This was release, pure and simple. Harper arrived about 20 minutes later, carrying bags of takeout food. "You're really here," she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the apartment. "I'm home," I said, and realized I meant it. She looked around slowly, then smiled. "So how does justice actually feel?" she asked. "Quiet," I told her, and heavier than I thought it would be. We ate sitting on the expensive hardwood floor, takeout containers spread around us like we were back in my old, cramped apartment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the bay shimmered with reflected city lights, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere behind me, the keys gleamed on the counter, a tangible reminder of everything that had been stolen and everything I'd just taken back. Before going to bed, I texted Grandpa. Moved in. "Thank you for fighting when I couldn't fight for myself." His reply came less than a minute later. "You always could fight, Charlotte. You just needed proof that you were right to do so." I stared at that message until the screen went dark. Proof of what they'd done, and proof of who I was becoming. A full month passed before I could sleep through an entire night without waking at 3 in the morning, expecting another secret to surface, another betrayal to be revealed. But the investigation moved forward quickly and efficiently. My parents' assets, both Tesla vehicles, the Malibu property, even their country club membership, everything was liquidated systematically. The proceeds flowed back into my account, back under my name, where they should have been all along. They moved into a roadside motel in Oakland, Grandpa informed me in a quiet voice during one of our meetings. "They're paying restitution now, $500 a month," court ordered. I didn't feel joy when he told me this. Just a sense of balance finally being restored. I settled into the Pacific Heights apartment gradually. Each morning, fog rolled over the bay like breath, and I'd sit on the balcony with my coffee and laptop open, taking on freelance work again. Clients came quickly now, referrals from Grandpa's extensive network, startups that needed branding and design work. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't scrambling desperately for every dollar. I was actually building something sustainable. Harper came over every weekend without fail. We hung artwork, unpacked boxes, gradually made the place feel like it belonged to both of us rather than to the strangers who'd lived there before. "You realize," she said once laughing, "you could probably buy this entire building now if you wanted to." "I don't want to own more things," I told her honestly. "I just want more peace in my life." Weeks turned into months, and the seasons changed outside my windows. My name was on everything now. Bank accounts, property titles, investment portfolios. But it wasn't actually the money that settled something deep inside me. It was the ownership of my own life, the agency I'd never had before. One evening, Grandpa invited me to dinner at his place. He looked frailer than before, but somehow lighter too, as if some enormous weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. "You did what I couldn't do," he told me over dessert. "You drew a clear line and held it." I smiled. "You taught me how to do that," I reminded him. That night, driving home through the city in the car I now owned outright, I passed the restaurant where everything had begun, where my world had shattered and reformed in the space of a single dinner. Through the glass windows, I could see people laughing, toasting, completely unaware of how quickly a family can fracture over greed and betrayal. I didn't stop driving. Some chapters in life deserve to stay permanently closed. In the end, I learned something fundamental about family and loyalty. Blood relation doesn't automatically guarantee loyalty or love. My parents had stolen my future and called it love, justified it as protection, but I took it back, piece by careful piece, quietly, legally, completely. Now, when I look out over the bay from my balcony, I don't see what I lost anymore. I see what I rebuilt from the ashes. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most in this world, remember this truth. You can still start over, and you can emerge stronger than you were before. And if stories like mine resonate with you, if they hit uncomfortably close to home, then stay with me because the next one might sound even more familiar than you'd expect.
At my sister's engagement dinner, my place card said "The Failure" in neat cursive, gold trim, right there beside the crystal glasses and folded napkins. Everyone saw it. No one said a word. My name is Vanessa, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever watched a room full of people you grew up with, people who once kissed your scraped knees and sang you lullabies, sit still while you were humiliated? That night, they laughed. My sister Bianca giggled behind her champagne flute. Her fiancé, Thomas, gave a low whistle and said, "Wow, you guys are savage." Uncle Darius slapped the table and roared. "Aunt Lydia?" She read it out loud and clutched her chest like it was the joke of the century. "The Failure," she cackled. "Who comes up with this stuff?" Only one person didn't laugh. Me. I stared at that card for 5 whole seconds. Long enough for my wine to settle. Long enough for the rage to cool into something sharper. I raised my glass, stood slowly, and said, "To family, the kind you learn to live without." Silence. Tense. Brittle. I held their stunned expressions for a breath longer, then placed the glass gently on the tablecloth, turned, and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because outside that hotel ballroom, something shifted in me. Not a snap. A release. The truth? I had paid for the venue, booked the dinner, covered the down payment for Bianca's custom ring when Thomas's card accidentally declined. I arranged the caterer, even loaned my sister the car she drove to the event. But none of it mattered. To them, I was the convenient wallet, the safety net, the one who never lived up to her potential but always footed the bill. They didn't just mock me. They did it on a night I paid for. And they expected me to swallow it with a smile. Instead, I walked outside, handed my valet ticket to the attendant, and reclaimed my name. Because that car was mine. And as I slid into the driver's seat and pulled away from the curb, I made one quick call to my assistant. "Hi, yes. Cancel the banquet hall, the bridal suite, and the floral delivery for Saturday." All of it was under my name. "Understood," she replied. "Anything else?" "Yes. Call the caterer. Tell them to sell the food elsewhere. And put the cancellation fee on the bride's card." "The card you added to the file for emergencies?" "Exactly that one." I hung up. Let them toast to that. I wasn't the failure. I was the foundation. And they had just stomped on the only thing keeping their celebration afloat. They thought they could humiliate me without consequence. They forgot who wrote the checks. This wasn't rage. This was receipt-based revenge. And I was just getting started. You don't wake up and become the failure overnight. It takes years of silent disrespect, subtle erasure, and twisted narratives passed around the dinner table like dessert. Growing up, I was the dependable one. The kid who followed rules, brought home A's, stayed quiet when others screamed. Bianca, my younger sister, was the wild card, charming, chaotic, impulsive. She wrecked 3 cars before she was 21, failed out of college twice, and somehow still got a standing ovation when she landed a basic marketing internship. Me? I built a career from scratch. Started a consulting firm that survived the pandemic and a recession. Paid off our parents' mortgage by 30. But every Thanksgiving, I was asked the same question. "Still single, Vanessa?" And if I mentioned work, "You really should focus more on your personal life. You don't want to end up alone." They didn't care that I was successful, because success, in their eyes, didn't count unless it was worn loud, flashy, Instagrammable. Bianca gave them chaos they could romanticize. I gave them stability they could use and overlook. She brought drama. I brought checks. When my mother got sick, it was me who moved back in, rearranged her medication, scheduled appointments, argued with insurance. Bianca would visit for 20 minutes, post a selfie by mom's bed, then disappear until the next crisis. Still, my parents called her the light of the family. I was the strong one. That label sounds like a compliment until you realize it just means no one will come check on you. When my firm landed its first $500,000 client, I told my father, hoping for a flicker of pride. He nodded absently and asked, "Have you thought about freezing your eggs?" It was never about my success. It was about my failure to conform. And when Bianca got engaged, it was like the family had found a new religion. Suddenly, my mother was glowing again. My father started talking about legacy. Every group chat lit up with dress options, ring photos, and our princess is finally settling down. Nobody asked how it was being funded. They just assumed someone else would pay. And I did. Because that's what I'd always done. The venue? My corporate discount. The catering deposit? Covered it. Bianca's engagement ring? I wired the funds when Thomas said he needed a few extra days to move money around. None of it was framed as sacrifice. It was framed as expectation. So when I walked into that engagement dinner, I knew I wasn't the star. I didn't want to be. But I didn't expect humiliation. I didn't expect to find that card. The failure. It wasn't a joke. It was a message. A reminder of the role they had cast me in. Dependable. Forgettable. Expendable. And finally, I'd had enough. Because when you spend your life keeping the house from burning down, eventually you realize it's not your job to rebuild what they've decided to burn. Sometimes the only power move left is walking away with the matches. The morning after the dinner, my phone lit up with missed calls. 23, to be exact. Texts followed. Bianca, was that really necessary? Mom, Vanessa, stop being dramatic. It was a harmless joke. Thomas, you've left us in a really tough position. We're trying to fix things. Can we talk? Dad, we need to discuss this like adults. Not one of them said they were sorry. No one asked if I was okay. They were just stunned that I'd done the unthinkable, set a boundary. I ignored the messages, but something kept gnawing at me. The card. The smirks. The coordinated cruelty of it all. That card didn't magically appear on the table. Someone ordered it. Someone planned it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't spontaneous mockery. It was a setup. I went back through the group text I'd been reluctantly added to during the engagement planning. The Vanessa will take care of it thread. I scrolled through months of messages, screenshots, links. Everything I'd been voluntold to handle. Then I saw it. A message from Bianca to her maid of honor, days before the dinner. OMG, wait till she sees her place card. Loudly crying face, I'm crying already. Tell Thomas to get it printed before Thursday. Gold trim, cursive, just like the others except you know. Followed by a laughing emoji. I stared at the screen. So, it wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't something one petty cousin did in a moment of stupidity. It was intentional. It was planned. Shared. Laughed about in advance. And they let me pay for it. I was footing the bill for my own public execution. Worse still, I remembered overhearing Bianca on the phone with the event planner 2 days prior. She was laughing in that high, glassy voice she used when she wanted to be taken seriously. Yeah, my sister's the responsible one, she said. Basically my unofficial maid of honor/bank. I hadn't flinched then. But now I felt it, all of it, settle like lead in my chest. They didn't just disrespect me. They built their celebration on top of me like I was some kind of invisible scaffolding. Like I didn't have power. Like I wouldn't notice. Like I wouldn't remember. I reached out to my assistant and asked her to confirm the list of reservations still under my name. She sent back a spreadsheet. It was worse than I thought. The reception hall. The catering. The honeymoon suite. The bachelorette weekend spa package. All charged to me. all scheduled under accounts they assumed I'd forget to check. I sat with that for a long time. Not angry. Not even hurt anymore. Just awake. This wasn't just about a card. This was about years of erasure. They never thought I'd fight back. Because I'd been conditioned to believe that being the strong one meant swallowing my rage and picking up the check. But they forgot something. I didn't get where I am by accident. I built everything they lean on. And now, I was pulling the plug. Because sometimes, power doesn't look like screaming in someone's face. Sometimes it looks like saying nothing and quietly burning down the parts of the bridge you own. I didn't cancel everything at once. That would have been loud, emotional, predictable. Instead, I let the clock tick quietly while I built my response like a strategy deck. First, I instructed my assistant to reassign the event venue's remaining balance to Bianca. No email notice. Just a quiet update on the system that would alert her 3 days before the final payment was due. Then the florist. I contacted them personally and explained I was no longer sponsoring the event. I recommended they request full payment immediately or walk away. I even CC'd Bianca with a subject line, "Best of luck finalizing the flowers."
She didn't respond.
She called instead. I let it ring. Then I did the same with the DJ, the decorator, and the hotel where they'd booked the honeymoon suite on my corporate card. All of them had agreements tied to my accounts, my name, my access. They'd taken it all for granted. So I took it back. Each call ended with a professional, courteous line. Unfortunately, due to recent developments, I'll no longer be covering the event. Kindly redirect all invoices to the bride and groom. No anger. No explanation. Just business. The bachelorette spa package was the most fun. I had prepaid for the entire weekend as a surprise. 3 nights in a luxury resort, full-body massages, champagne brunches, everything Bianca had boasted about to her friends like it came from Thomas. So I contacted the resort and canceled the group reservation. On the day they were supposed to arrive, they stood at the check-in desk and were told, "There's no booking under this name." The reservation was canceled by the cardholder. Tara, one of Bianca's less cruel bridesmaids, texted me, "Did you cancel the spa weekend? They're freaking out. I don't want to get involved, but damn. That's cold." I replied, "Not cold. Calculated. Also, tell her to try gratitude next time. Because here's the thing, I wasn't trying to destroy the wedding. I was trying to remind them whose foundation they stood on. You don't get to humiliate the person paying your bills. You don't get to write the failure on a card and expect the so-called failure to keep funding your fantasy. They made me invisible for years. But money leaves footprints. And when mine disappeared, so did their plans. The final move came with perfect timing. I called my bank and withdrew the $15,000 I had sitting in a family emergency fund I'd opened years ago, originally intended to support my parents if anything happened to them. They never used it. But now they had quietly given Bianca access, just in case she needed a little cushion during the wedding planning. I emptied the account. That same evening, my mother called. Her voice was tight, brittle. "Vanessa," she said, "did you move the funds from the joint family account?" I paused. Then I said, "Oh, you mean the account for the daughter, who never fails?" She didn't answer. I figured the failure shouldn't be responsible for the family's emergencies anymore, I added. "Vanessa," she snapped, "this isn't the time to be petty." I hung up, not in anger, in peace. Because for the first time in years, they had to figure out life without me. And that was the beginning of the end for them. The real chaos started on Thursday morning. Bianca called me 13 times. Left voicemails ranging from fake apologies to full-blown screaming matches with herself. Her final message was the most revealing. "You always think you're so clever, but you're bitter, jealous. This wedding is still happening, with or without you." I smiled when I heard it, because the part she didn't know, it wasn't happening, not like she thought. That afternoon, the event planner called me directly. Her voice was tight with panic. "Vanessa, I've worked with your family for years. I just got off the phone with Bianca and Thomas. They say you're sabotaging them." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I just said, I'm stepping back from things I was never thanked for. That's not sabotage. That's boundaries. There was a pause on the line. Then, honestly, good for you. By Friday, the venue was locked. Bianca had missed the reissued deposit deadline. Her card declined. The manager told me she sobbed at the front desk, begging for a grace period. There was none. The reception hall was already rebooked to a pharmaceutical company's quarterly gala. The banner out front read, "Building toward the future." Poetic. The hotel suite was released to the public. Someone else snagged it before Bianca even got to the front desk. Her bridesmaids texted me a blurry photo of her, sitting on the floor of the lobby, mascara streaked down her cheeks, muttering, "She's ruining my life." But I wasn't ruining anything. I was simply removing myself. And when the caterer called her that night to confirm that final payment was now overdue, she broke. She finally called me, not screaming, just whispering, "Why are you doing this?" I paused, then answered, "You taught me something, Bianca. You taught me that kindness in our family is seen as weakness. So, I'm correcting the imbalance." She started crying. I didn't, because this wasn't revenge. This was recalibration. I had spent my entire life being the fix-it girl, the one who showed up,
Paid.
supported, smiled through gritted teeth while being belittled, overlooked, and used. And for what? To be labeled the failure? To be mocked in front of everyone? To have my contributions buried under their champagne and confetti? No more. That night, I went out to dinner. Alone. A small French place downtown. My phone vibrated on the table, texts pouring in from my mother, father, uncles, aunts. "What are you doing? This isn't how family behaves. You're embarrassing us." I silenced the notifications. Then my assistant called. "Hey," she said, "we just got a notification. Someone tried to log into your business PayPal from your sister's email." I exhaled slowly. Shut it down. Already done. I sipped my wine. Let them scramble. They'd built their celebration on stolen grace. And now the scaffolding was gone. The party was canceled. The vendors pulled out. The guests received last-minute postponement emails with vague excuses about a family emergency. But the real emergency was that the woman they had always dismissed had finally walked away. And now, they were free-falling. Without me. By Saturday morning, my family was in full meltdown mode. The hotel ballroom sat empty, tables unset, staff waiting for a bride who would never arrive. Guests began trickling in, dressed to the nines, only to be met with confused faces and locked doors. The whispers started instantly. "Wasn't the wedding today? Is she okay? Did he call it off?" I heard something about money issues. And like wildfire, the truth spread. My cousin Marcus, who'd flown in from Atlanta, posted a cryptic Instagram story. "When the family clown turns out to be the one running the circus. #plot twist." Meanwhile, Bianca was unraveling. One of her friends forwarded me a video from the morning. She was standing outside the venue, screaming into her phone, barefoot, her veil slipping off her bun. She did this. My sister did this. She took everything. She wasn't wrong. But I hadn't taken anything that was hers. I simply reclaimed what was mine. The final nail in the coffin came when Thomas's parents pulled him aside and asked some hard questions. "Why did your fiancée rely on her sister to pay for everything? You're an investment banker, aren't you? If she can't manage a wedding, how will she manage a household?" By the time Sunday rolled around, the engagement was on pause. Not officially broken, but certainly cracked. And my parents? They showed up at my condo unannounced. My father stood there, fists balled at his sides. My mother's lips were trembling with whatever speech she had rehearsed in the car. "You humiliated us," he said. "I didn't invite them in." I stood at the door. "You let them call me a failure," I replied. "At a table I paid for. In a room I arranged. For a woman I carried on my back for years." My mother opened her mouth. Closed it. "You made a mockery of your sister's future." Dad tried again, but his voice faltered. "Wrong," I said, calm and steady. "I exposed the mockery you all made of mine. I handed him a manila envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Receipts," I said. "Every payment I made for your precious daughter's dream wedding. It totals just over $38,000. I've itemized it for your convenience." He turned red. "You're charging your own family?" "I'm forgiving the debt," I said. "But I'm keeping the record." Then I shut the door. Not angrily, not violently, but firmly. And I leaned against it as their shadows faded from my doorstep.
They never saw me as family.
Just a tool, a resource, a fallback plan. But now the plan had changed. Later that night, I received a message from Grandma, the only one who never laughed at that dinner. It said, "Proud of you, baby. Maybe now they'll learn how much weight you were really carrying." And in that moment, I exhaled everything I'd been holding in for years.
The pain.
The guilt. The endless need to prove myself.
Gone.
Because their collapse wasn't just a result of what I did. It was a consequence of what they never did.
Appreciate me.
Respect me. Protect me. And now that the rug had been pulled out, they were left with the truth. I wasn't the failure. I was the foundation. And when the foundation walks away, the whole house comes crashing down. For the first time in years, I felt light. Lighter than the debt I'd paid. Lighter than the silence I'd kept. Lighter than the invisible weight of trying to earn a place in a family that only valued what I could do for them, not who I was. I poured all the energy I used to give away into myself. And it showed. My firm expanded. A Fortune 100 company signed a retainer contract. I hired 5 new analysts and finally promoted my assistant, the same one who helped pull the strings during my quiet storm, to operations director. She cried when I told her. "You taught me more in 6 months," she said, "than I learned in 4 years of college." I bought myself a new apartment. Nothing over the top. Just open windows, warm wood, and silence that healed. I joined a weekly boxing class, not to fight the world, but to finally feel the power I'd been hiding in my body all these years. And friends, real ones, found me. One of the guests at Bianca's failed wedding, someone I barely remembered, reached out. Her name was Ellie, a quiet girl from our childhood block.
She said,
"I saw what they did to you, and I saw how you walked away. I don't know if you remember this, but when we were 12, you gave me your shoes after I stepped in the mud before picture day. You've always been someone people step on, but you're also someone who always stands up." We met for coffee. She introduced me to people, kind people. Friends who didn't care about what I owned or how much I gave. People who didn't call me strong like it was a leash. People who simply said, "You're enough." I started mentoring girls from disadvantaged communities, not out of guilt, but because I finally had something to give that wasn't being stolen from me. My Sundays became mine again. No forced family brunches. No performative check-ins. Just books.
Jazz.
Journaling.
Peace.
I thought about Bianca sometimes. Not with rage. Not with resentment. But with clarity. She wasn't born a villain. She was raised in a system that rewarded her cruelty and taught her that my silence was consent. But I'd broken that system now. And in its place, I was building something better. Not a new version of me. Just the real one. And when people asked why I looked so calm these days, I told them the truth. Because I stopped bleeding for people who never wanted to heal. I didn't need revenge to feel whole. I needed release. And that's what I gave myself. One soft, powerful, glorious boundary at a time. 3 months passed before I saw any of them again. It was at Grandma's 80th birthday. I almost didn't go. But she'd sent a handwritten card. "No pressure, baby," it said. "But I'd like to see the woman you became." So I came. Not out of obligation, but from strength. I wore a simple black jumpsuit. No labels, no designer bag, just presence. Calm. Rooted presence. The moment I walked into the hall, the air shifted. Conversations quieted. Glasses paused mid-sip. Bianca turned and stared like she'd seen a ghost. She looked thinner, paler. Thomas wasn't at her side. Someone whispered they'd postponed indefinitely. Mom approached me halfway through the buffet line. She had on pearls and a new smile, the fake kind you wear when you need something. She touched my arm gently and said, "You look well." I looked her dead in the eyes. I am. Dad stood behind her, nodding stiffly like we were strangers at a board meeting. Bianca never spoke to me that night.
But she watched me.
Every time someone came up to hug me, thank me, ask for my card. She watched it all. When Grandma gave her toast, she looked right at me and said, "Some people give gold. Others give their spine." I've learned to value the second more. To Vanessa, who taught me that silence isn't always grace. Sometimes it's survival. The whole room clapped. I didn't. I just smiled. After the party, I headed to the valet. My cousins were outside, laughing about something. One of them nudged the other and said, "Still driving that same car, huh?" Right then, my phone buzzed. It was my assistant. "Jet's ready. You'll be in the air in 40 minutes. I raised my voice just loud enough for them to hear and said into the phone,
Great.
"Tell the pilot I'll be there after one stop." The laughter stopped.
Just like that.
I nodded politely, stepped into my car, that same car, and drove off with a peace they could never purchase. Because the truth is, I don't need them to understand what they lost. I don't need them to apologize, or regret, or beg. I need only this: to keep walking forward while they sit in the ruins of the little kingdom they built on my back. They crown me the failure. But I was never theirs to define. And now, they can choke on their silence. Because I finally learned, you don't need revenge when you've already outgrown the war. Good riddance, old woman. Those were the last words my son said to me, before slamming the door on a home I built, a life I nurtured, and a family I once believed in. My name is Eleanor Grace. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been discarded by someone you once carried, like love had an expiration date, and you were suddenly past it? Because that's what it felt like. That morning, my son Marcus stood in the living room with the same posture I used to fix as a child, now towering over me with a disgusted face I barely recognized. I had raised that face. I had fed it, kissed it, wiped tears from its eyes.
But that day?
That face said I was worthless. "You just sit here all day. You don't even do anything," he spat, motioning toward the couch where I had rested my bad leg. "This isn't a retirement home, Mom. I need the space. You need to go." My heart didn't break with a loud crack. No, it cracked quietly, like an old window pane flexing under storm winds. I didn't argue.
I didn't cry.
I simply stood up, picked up the one small leather bag I had packed the night before. I had known this was coming. He laughed. And when I paused at the door and turned back, he looked annoyed, like I was taking too long to disappear. I smiled gently, not because I forgave him, but because I understood him now. "Take care of the house," I said softly. And I walked out in silence. It was the same house I'd inherited from my grandfather. The one I maintained through my husband's long illness, through single motherhood, and through 2 jobs while Marcus found himself in college on my dime. The same house I gave to him freely as a gift when he said he wanted to raise a family there. But in his eyes, I had overstayed my welcome. I took nothing but my small bag, a few documents, and a ring my late husband had given me before he died. I didn't even ask for a ride. I walked to the bus stop, sat on the cold bench while the world moved around me like I was invisible. Nobody noticed the old woman gripping her leather bag like it held a secret. But I noticed. I noticed everything. I noticed how Marcus didn't ask where I would go. I noticed how he didn't care that I had been paying the property taxes in secret for the past 3 years. And I noticed one last thing, something he never would. The safe in the back of the house? The one behind the mirror in the master bedroom? The one with the deed to the house and the $1.4 million in quietly invested retirement funds I had never touched? I had emptied it 3 nights ago. He didn't know that the house was still legally mine, or that the only reason the roof hadn't collapsed over his pride was because I had quietly, silently, kept paying for everything while he hustled. So when I left with more than a bag. I left with the final piece of leverage. Because sometimes, when a mother walks away, she's not abandoning the house. She's watching it crumble. Marcus wasn't always like this. He used to cling to my skirt when he was small, crying if I left the room, his tiny voice calling out, "Mama, wait for me." I waited. I always waited. Through scraped knees, schoolyard fights, panic attacks before math tests, even his first heartbreak, I stayed awake all night just to make sure he didn't spiral. But somewhere along the way, Marcus stopped calling me Mama and started calling me a burden. His change wasn't sudden. It was slow, subtle, like dust creeping over a painting you forget to touch. He started talking less, visiting less. The texts came without emojis, without warmth. And after college, which I paid for every last dollar, he came back home with a chip on his shoulder and entitlement in his voice. I gave him the house. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he got on his feet. But the roots of ingratitude grow fast when you water them with silence. He got a job, a mediocre one he constantly blamed for not seeing his potential. But I still cooked,
Cleaned.
paid for the plumbing when it burst that winter. I even paid the mortgage a few times when he forgot. He never asked how I managed. And I never told him that I sold the last piece of my jewelry, my mother's gold bracelet, to make sure his lights stayed on. Because that's what mothers do, right? But the more I gave, the more invisible I became. He started throwing parties without telling me. He moved my things into the laundry room to make space. Then, one day, I heard him tell a girl at the party, "That's just my mom. She doesn't really do anything. She's like background." Background. I raised a man who now treated me like wallpaper. And when I confronted him about it, he laughed. Said I was being dramatic. Said he was just joking. Said I needed to chill. But the line that broke something deep inside me? "You should be grateful I let you stay here, Mom. Most people your age are in homes."
Homes.
Like the one I built. Like the one I gave him. That was when I started planning. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was survival. I began organizing my files, the deed, the bank accounts, the trust fund I never told him about. I met with a quiet, retired lawyer who had helped my father back in the day. He told me exactly what I needed to do. The house was still in my name. I had just let Marcus believe it was his. And that trust fund? He thought I had spent it on my simple lifestyle. He had no idea I'd been investing small, consistent amounts since before he was born. The balance? $1.4 million. My name. My control. So I moved the funds. Secured the deed. Emptied the safe he never cared to open. And packed my bag. Not with clothes, with documentation. Because when you raise someone to believe they're owed everything, you better prepare for the moment they realize they were never holding the power. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Marcus looked at me. Like I was an inconvenience he couldn't wait to delete. The first real warning sign came during a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I had just returned from the corner store, my knees aching from the cold, and the front door was cracked open. Marcus was in the living room, pacing with his Bluetooth in. "She's still here." "I don't know. Man, it's weird. She just won't leave." He laughed. "She thinks this is still her house or something. I swear, bro, once she's out, I'm gutting this place. Hardwood floors, gaming den, rooftop deck. I've already got buyers interested." Buyers? I stood frozen in the hallway. I didn't make a sound. I just quietly stepped back and eased the door closed behind me. My fingers trembled around the grocery bag, but I forced myself to walk in calmly, like I hadn't heard a thing. That night, I couldn't sleep.
Buyers.
Renovations. He was planning to sell the house. The house that carried my husband's laughter in the walls, the scent of my mother's stew in its floors, the baby height marks still penciled inside the pantry door. He hadn't just turned on me. He was preparing to erase me. It all started to make sense. The sudden interest in real estate podcasts. The guest visits from that slick-talking friend of his who always wore a designer belt and smelled like cold ambition. The way Marcus had recently started asking about the house's paperwork. Just wondering, he'd said, in case something happens. You know, inheritance laws and all. He thought I was dying. Or maybe he was hoping I would. But what he didn't realize was that I had been watching him, too. I started paying attention. He left his laptop open one day while stepping out for a beer run. I didn't open anything. I didn't have to. His inbox was up on the screen. And right there in bold letters was an email titled, Preliminary Offer, $1.2 million, pending clearance. I stared at the screen. He had already started the sale process. He didn't know the house was still under my name. He assumed, wrongly, that I had signed it over years ago. What broke my heart wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that he hadn't even asked, hadn't even sat down to say, Mom, I'm in trouble. I need help. I would have listened. I always listened.
But now?
Now I was listening for something else, the sound of Karma getting dressed. 2 days later, I took my walker, the one he hated seeing in the living room, and pushed it slowly down the hallway. I knocked gently on his door. He looked up from his phone, barely interested. I'm heading out for a few days, I said. To where? I smiled. Just clearing space. Like you asked. He shrugged. Good. About time. I left that evening with my one leather bag and a file folder tucked deep inside it. The folder contained everything. The deed, the trust account confirmation, even the notice I had filed quietly with the county about the property freeze. Because before you teach someone a lesson, you have to let them believe they've won. I didn't check into a hotel. I didn't stay with friends. I went to a place no one knew about, a small cabin 2 towns over, one I inherited from my aunt long ago, but never spoke of. No phone calls, no texts. Just the sound of birds, firewood, and truth cracking in the silence. It was time to disappear.
But not to hide, to prepare.
First, I called my lawyer. Mr. Ellis had known me since I was 22. He helped my father draft the original deed and had watched me build my life one brick at a time. He answered on the second ring. Is it time? He asked, without surprise. It is, I said. Initiate the transfer. Freeze everything connected to the property. And schedule the deed pull. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure you want to go through with this, Eleanor? I looked out the window of the cabin. The woods swayed gently, like even nature understood. He said I was a burden, I whispered. It's time he learns who is carrying what. After the call, I made a checklist. Freeze Marcus's access to the joint property insurance. Remove my name from any joint utility bills. Let the new expenses roll in. File an alert with the housing board about unauthorized listings under my property address. Pull all digital and paper copies of the deed into my full possession. And, most importantly, lock the trust fund. Marcus had no idea, but the $1.4 million wasn't just cash in a bank. It was diversified. Quiet shares in 3 companies I'd invested in since 1999, all under a private trustee name. I redirected the dividends to a private account, one that Marcus had no legal path to. Not anymore. I spent the next 48 hours orchestrating everything with surgical precision. Each step was a pin pulled from the grenade I'd been holding in my chest for years. Back at the house, I knew Marcus would begin to notice. The cable? Cancelled. Water bill? No autopay. Insurance letters? Marked, address removed by owner. And the safe? That old black box bolted behind the bedroom mirror? Empty. 3 days after I left, he texted. Marcus, hey, you forgot your walker. Marcus. Also, do you still have the login for the property tax site? Marcus. Mom? Marcus. WTH. Why are the utilities bouncing back? Marcus. Call me. I didn't reply. Not to punish. To give him space to feel the weight I'd been carrying. The following morning, I made one last call to the real estate company I knew he was trying to use. Hi. I said, my voice firm but polite. This is Eleanor Grace, sole legal owner of 119 Maple Lane. I'm calling to inform you that no authorization has been given to list this property. Any listing activity is fraudulent and will be pursued. The agent on the other end sputtered, then quickly apologized. I'll pull the file right away, ma'am. Please do. By noon, the listing was gone. And Marcus? He still had no idea how deep the hole went. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't come with screaming or slamming doors. Sometimes it walks away quietly, then returns like thunder. 3 days after I left, the cracks became too big for Marcus to ignore.
He called. Twice.
Then 5 times. Then he left a voicemail, The first in years where his voice didn't sound smug. Mom, I don't know what's going on. The power's off. The safe is empty. There's a problem with the house paperwork. The bank says your name is still on everything. Please call me back. I didn't. Instead, I listened to his words again in the cabin, sipping tea and watching the fire dance like it knew what was coming. The next day, Marcus tried to access the trust account. Of course, it bounced back. The trustee sent me a secure message. Attempted login blocked. No access granted. I smiled. It was time for the final move. I returned to the city. Not to the house, but to the county clerk's office. I submitted a formal ownership review, showing the title, insurance records, tax history, and all bills paid in full under my name. The clerk nodded solemnly. Within hours, I had an official document in hand, proof of exclusive ownership. The house wasn't his. It never was. While Marcus was busy throwing parties, calling me background noise, and laughing at his burden of a mother, I was the one holding the foundation together. And now, the scaffolding he leaned on was gone. I delivered the notice by courier. To Marcus James Grace, this serves as a formal revocation of all living and legal rights to the property located at 119 Maple Lane. You are required to vacate the premises within 72 hours. He must have thought it was a prank, until the property manager arrived the next morning with a locksmith and a police officer standing beside him. Marcus refused to open the door, so they opened it for him. I didn't need to be there to imagine the scene, him scrambling around in boxers, yelling that this is MY house, as the officer calmly pointed at the paperwork. It's not anymore. I received a photo an hour later, a pile of trash bags and suitcases on the curb. My grandmother's china set? Shattered. My husband's bookshelf? Tossed into the driveway. But I didn't feel anger. I felt release. The kind that comes after years of carrying someone else's weight while they spat on your hands. Later that evening, Marcus texted me again. Marcus, you're really doing this? Marcus, after everything I've done for you? Marcus, you're ruining my life. I finally replied. Me? You sold me first. I just sent the receipt. He didn't respond. I turned off my phone, lit a candle, and sat in silence. Because this wasn't just payback. It was recognition that I was no longer the silent supporter, the wallpaper mother, the invisible soul holding up ungrateful bones. I was the storm he never saw coming, and he was finally getting wet. 3 days after he was evicted, Marcus showed up at my cabin. Not to apologize, not to reflect, but to beg. I watched from behind the curtain as he stood outside, shivering, his hoodie half-zipped, cheeks flushed with panic. He didn't know I'd seen the news earlier that morning. His failed sale had been flagged in the local business paper. Prospective home sale falls through after owner reclaims deed. Legal dispute erupts over $1.2 million listing. Apparently, the buyer had already paid a deposit. Marcus had promised a quick close. But there was nothing to close. Because he never owned it. He knocked again. Louder this time.
Mom.
Open the door. Please, I didn't know. I didn't know you still had the deed. I didn't move. He shouted, I'm homeless, Mom. You can't just leave me like this. I smiled bitterly behind the curtain. That's exactly what he did to me. Eventually, he gave up. I heard his footsteps crunch away through the gravel. Later that day, I received an email from a realtor I'd worked with before. Apparently, Marcus had tried to apply for emergency housing loans, but his credit was in shambles. The unpaid utilities, the car lease in my name he defaulted on, even the forgotten student loans, they were all coming back now. One by one, the cards he had stacked fell. No house, no job. He had been fired for leaving work to handle personal affairs. No friends. The party crowd disappeared the second the drinks dried up. Meanwhile, I returned to the city quietly. I didn't take back the house. I donated it to a women's shelter initiative I had supported quietly for years. They turned it into transitional housing. The master bedroom, where I had cried in silence so many nights, was now a safe place for single mothers. The pantry with the baby height marks? Still intact. But now, new hands were adding their own. I left a note in the kitchen drawer before handing the keys over. This house once held silence. May it now echo with strength. Marcus didn't know, but he'd soon find out. Because 2 weeks later, he came back to the house, tried to use his old key, only to find the locks changed and a group of women cooking dinner in the kitchen. One of them told me he just stood there for a long time, frozen. When they asked who he was, he mumbled, I used to live here.
Used to.
He walked away slowly, carrying nothing but a phone that no longer connected to anything. No car.
No job.
No backup plan. He had tried to sell what he didn't own, throw out the one person who'd protected him, and then cry foul when the ground crumbled under his own arrogance. That's the thing about entitlement. It builds castles on sand. And when the tide comes in, only the truth remains. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't need to. Some roots, once pulled, don't need replanting. They just teach you how deep you've grown and how far you can go. After signing the final transfer to the Shelter Foundation, I walked to a nearby cafe, ordered myself a slice of lemon tart and a chamomile tea, sat by the window, and for the first time in years, I didn't check my phone, because no one needed anything from me anymore. And that silence? It felt like peace. In the weeks that followed, I moved into a sunlit condo downtown. Just one bedroom, but it overlooked the river. Every morning, I'd open the curtains and watch the city breathe. I joined a book club, started volunteering at a center for young women navigating estrangement and financial abuse. They called me Miss Eleanor. And they listened when I spoke, because I knew what it meant to give everything and be left with nothing but your name. I told them, there's power in walking away quietly, because while they laugh, you build. One of them asked if I miss Marcus. I didn't lie. I said, yes, but I don't miss who he became. I miss the boy I raised, not the man who forgot who raised him. I'd later learned through a mutual acquaintance that Marcus was sleeping on couches. No one wanted to rent to him. His reputation had spiraled after the failed house sale made local headlines. Apparently, even his ex-girlfriend sued him for fraud. The friend said he was trying to start fresh. I hoped he did, but I no longer planned my life around his redemption. Instead, I traveled. I took a solo trip to the Grand Canyon, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I stood at the edge and cried not from sadness, but from release. Because in that vastness, I realized something. I was never just a mother. I was never just a caretaker. I was a woman who had endured, survived, and chosen to rise. And rise I did. One day, the shelter sent me photos. The living room, my old one, now filled with laughter, toddler toys, and holiday lights. A woman stood in the kitchen holding her newborn, smiling softly with eyes that had clearly known pain. I stared at the picture for a long time. That house had a new purpose now. It no longer needed me, and I no longer needed to prove I was worthy of space. My life was quiet, but it was mine. Built not on resentment, but renewal. Not on revenge, but restoration. Because sometimes the best way to rise is to let go of the people who only ever wanted to stand on your shoulders. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of golden afternoon that made the world feel like it had finally exhaled. I was sitting outside my condo, tending to the small herb garden I'd planted on the balcony. Mint, basil, lavender. Things that grow when you water them slowly, with care. The things I wish someone had once done for me. That's when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he stood. Marcus. Thinner. Paler. Shoulders caved in like a man trying to fold into himself. His hair was unkempt, the bags under his eyes heavier than I'd ever seen. He looked lost. "Hi, Mom," he said. I didn't say anything. Just watched him. Waited. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wrinkled envelope. Inside was a letter. Not a grand apology. Not a dramatic confession. Just a few lines in shaky handwriting. I thought I was owed everything, but I never realized who gave it all. "You didn't abandon me. I abandoned the only person who ever stayed. I understand now. I just wanted you to know. My hands trembled slightly as I held it. He looked at me, desperate for something. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe closure. Maybe just acknowledgement. Do you want to come in? I asked quietly.
He shook his head.
I don't deserve that.
Not yet.
Maybe not ever. Then he paused. But could I just sit here? On the steps. For a bit. I nodded. He sat in silence while I returned to my herbs.
We didn't speak.
We didn't cry. We just breathed in the same air, for the first time in what felt like forever. When he finally stood up to leave, he said, "Thank you for not slamming the door." I smiled gently. I didn't need to slam it, Marcus. I already walked through it. And that was the truth. Because I had finally crossed over into a life where I was not a burden. Where I didn't have to beg to be seen. Where my name, my presence, didn't come with conditions. I had nothing left to prove. Marcus faded into the street. And I returned to my lavender, clipping a few sprigs to dry inside. As the sun dipped below the skyline, I poured myself a glass of wine. Raised it to no one in particular. To the mothers who held everything together. To the women who left quietly and rebuilt loudly. And to every person who was once treated like background, you were the foundation all along. My story doesn't end with revenge. It ends with freedom. And the kind of peace that money can't buy, but strength can earn. They called her a burden. She carried their world. They called her unworthy. She gave them everything. But when she left, they finally learned who really owned the house and the heart they took for granted.